Hello, and welcome to the Sustainability Story. I am Andres Vinelli, the Chief Economist at CFA Institute, and I'm today's host. We are recording live from New York City from the CFA Institute Climate Conference. And today we're honored to have Brian Mintz as a guest. He's a noted professional in the field of responsible investing. He's currently the Managing Director of Responsible Investing at University Pension Plan, UPP, which is a consortium of three universities, and he is responsible for integrating into their perspective sustainable finance considerations. He has a master's degree in environmental studies. He's also a mechanical engineer. And he holds a sustainable investment professional certification. He has over a decade of experience in responsible investment. And he's also the co-founder and co-chair of the Canadian Responsible Investing Working Group. And he has made invaluable contributions at CFA's ESG Technical Committee. With that, we turn to Brian. Brian, thank you so much for being here with us. We appreciate the contributions to the industry in various shapes, including being part of some technical committee at CFA Institute on ESG-related matters. That's greatly appreciated. And you have an interesting, somewhat unique background that marries financial analyst type of backgrounds with more of an engineering perspective. How did you become interested in responsible investment matters? What's the story there?
Yeah, it's quite a journey. So I'll go way back. So high school, math, science, pretty good, pretty interested in it. So what do you do with math and science? You can be a mathematician or a scientist, or I want to be a bit more hands-on. So, okay, engineering. Engineering makes sense. Great. Came out of school, did that. Not hard engineering for a few years, more sort of business process engineering, pretty interesting. But if I go back to my roots, my dad actually is a scientist, and he actually is a contributing author to one of the IPCC reports on climate change. So this is
it runs in the family.
It runs in the family. We've been at this for a while. So I was like, I think I want to do this in my day job. I don't want to just think about it on the side. So I went back to school, did the environmental studies degree, thinking I would come out being sort of a corporate social responsibility type person within a corporation. So this is a number of years ago. So that was kind of what I thought. Go in there, and then I had the great fortune to see someone from Innovest Strategic Value Advisors came and spoke at one of my classes. So Innovest is one of the early ESG research houses, so along with KLD, Jancy Research back in the day. And I was like, whoa, this is interesting, because they were talking about not just analyzing ESG factors, but they were talking about the role of finance and how important that was. So I was like, I really want to do that. So I got an internship with them. That was great. I took a course also with Jane Ambixer, who worked at Mercer, the investment consulting house, and had the great fortune of getting a job within the investment consulting world after that. So from there, CFA, I want to touch on that for an instant, because this is a long time ago that I was getting started, and I was really passionate about these issues, and I thought, the financial industry needs to pay more attention to these issues. But I could already see, like, me, okay, engineer, whatever, I didn't do economics, I didn't do finance, people aren't going to take me seriously.
I bet it felt a little lonely, right? Back then.
It was, there were probably less than two handfuls of people at, say, in pension funds that were focused in this area. There were probably less than one handful of people at asset managers in Canada at the time focused in this area. So I thought, I think I need to do the CFA, both to help the program, to help myself build my knowledge in this area, but also to sort of get over hopefully the credibility hump that I might encounter when I met with people in the industry.
And the rest is history, as they say. But do you think that today we have a critical mass of professionals in the industry that understand the basics of this topic, or is this still quite a lonely place to be in your experience?
I think there's kind of two-parter answer to that. I think there's a lot of people who are interested in this space, that are interested in climate change, that are interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's a lot of people interested. There's not as many experts in terms of actual practical application to investment decisions, say. So people want to do the right thing, and they want to incorporate these things into how they invest. But I think there's still some work to do in terms of application and putting actual effort into it. And I think, CFA is helping with that through the ESG certificate course, for example.
This is very much in the forth of our mind, but one of the interesting things, in my opinion, about your journey is you call it the Canadian Responsible Investing Working Group. So how did that come about?
So I can't even remember the year that we started that, but it was the very first meeting was in a small boardroom, and I think there were maybe 14 people that showed up. This is obviously pre-pandemic, so we're all there in person. Hei Wong Kong was someone, she had recently come to Toronto from the UK, and she brought over, a kind of a different perspective that the people that were kind of had similar roles to me didn't really have, or we were searching for, I guess. And she kind of came into the area. She went around, met with all the different people, and was like, and then we were chatting, and we're like, we really ought to bring people together to talk about these things. We all have common challenges. We all have, similar sorts of objectives, but we're like you said, we're not lonely, but each of us are two people in all these different organizations, and we're all negotiating and dealing with many of the same challenges. So let's come together and chat. So we started to come together on a quarterly basis. We got together, we'd have breakfast, and we started to get into like, okay, what are we trying to achieve here? And then what we're trying to achieve is just having a safe place to talk amongst each other. And that turned out to be the focus of the group for a long time, was just, let's make sure we get together and have a chat. There were some working groups that spun out of that and sort of came up with certain things. So there was some work around disclosure. So what sort of disclosure should asset owners expect of managers? So that was kind of a working group. There's a lot of work around climate, put on a few different events, for example, for the industry. But it always came back to, when we schedule out our time, it was like, okay, there's a big long time for breakfast and chatting, and people show up at the beginning of that because they just want to talk to people and either commiserate or celebrate wins with each other. So it's just great to have that open dialogue.
Interesting, because sometimes it's difficult to sit down with folks who are in the same value chain, up or down, or competitors in the area, and get folks to talk in a safe manner about emerging problems that are difficult to first have common language around and then develop metrics. So any lessons in your experience trying to do that?
Having been in this sort of responsible investing sustainability space for a long time, I always find people are pretty open and people want to chat. So there's, you can often just reach out to someone. You might read a report or something that someone wrote, and you think, that's fantastic. If you reach out to that person, you say, I think that was fantastic what you did, they'll write back to you and you can start up a conversation, So I think people are pretty open to this, and people who are focused in this area tend to be open because, yes, they want to do their job and they want to do well for their beneficiaries, but they often have sort of a wider view of the world as well and want to see everyone be successful.
Amazing. And so you've done a lot collaborating with folks in the industry. And can you tell us a little bit more about your shop? What kind of factors do you take into account? I understand that you're in the investment process and UPP and trying to incorporate some of these important factors into their considerations. How does that work?
Yeah, so University Pension Plan, we're only, at the time that we're talking, we're less than 2 years old. So we're a very new pension plan. But we came in to life with some existing assets and liabilities. So 3 different universities and then a 4th one joined, all brought investments to the table, relationships with investment managers that we got to know over the past year and a half, so to speak. And so we're almost exclusively externally managed. So when we think about ESG factors, we're thinking more about how do our partners deal with these issues rather than us ourselves dealing with them. We're not selecting individual securities, for example. We have partners who are doing that. So that's very much the focus of our activity, is evaluating and working with our partners on improvement. So we'll go down the chain. We've developed a rubric, sort of a scoring system where we can go through and identify to what extent our partners meeting our let's call it rather lofty expectations. So we kind of come at it more from an absolute approach, and we think about the firm. So what kind of supports do investment teams have internally? We think specifically about investment processes and the people who are actually responsible for investment decisions. What sort of knowledge do they have? What sort of tools do they have? And then we think about the outputs and outcomes. So that can be everything from what's in the portfolio. So we have some tools at our disposal to evaluate portfolios, but also what sort of outputs and outcomes are occurring. So stewardship, for example, if they're responsible for proxy voting on our behalf, how is that going? What does their policy look like? How are they executing on their policy? If there's, we really like to see outcome-focused engagement activity for public managers. How does that work? How do they set targets? How do they keep track of activity in support of sustainability-related improvements or sustainability-related disclosure improvements? So we're really focused on that relationship with our investment partners, and we really want great partners who want to work with us through this journey.
I imagine it's a challenging journey because we're trying to come up with the right disclosures, corporate disclosures, so folks that you hire to select securities can be more accurate in how they measure the risks and opportunities for each individual security. There might be issues on how you know whether the firms that you select actually do what they claim they're doing, and that's even if folks try very hard, it's difficult to tell whether they're truly incorporated in the investment process. There's the issue of fiduciary. Have you had any encounters of people saying, well, from a fiduciary perspective, we cannot do what you want us to do? Has that been a thing for you?
No, because the lens for all of this work is how do we make sure we can pay our beneficiaries the benefits that they expect at the cost that they expect, right? So we don't want to increase contribution rates, but we do want to pay the benefits people expect. So that's always the lens that we're using when we're having these discussions. We want these practices because we believe they will help us be a better investor, because we think they will help our partners be better investors. And we're cognizant of the differences, so that depending on the investment strategy, there are different tools and levers that the teams have at their disposal, right? If we have a passive equity strategy, we don't obviously expect any sort of ESG integration. That's absurd. But we do expect stewardship. And in fact, we really want to see stewardship at the public policy level, because if we're investing in a broad market through a passive strategy, the movement of the market matters a lot to us, as opposed to the single individual companies within the market.
That's fascinating. So even for passive instruments, the voting should be consistent with what you demand from them. How does that conversation go with those players?
It's good. It's good because we come through that lens of, we think this can help provide us with better outcomes for the long term. Like, okay, we're on the same page. This is good start. And then if we talk about why we would want better governance practices, they could generally agree with that. So or we talk about why independent boards are important, they can sort of generally agree with those things piece by piece. So maybe that all adds up to a certain approach to voting, but really it's a bunch of really manageable, understandable reasons why we want certain things. So I think, and we're definitely willing to meet partners with where they're at, but what we want is this philosophical alignment for them to, when we talk with them, to them to display to us that they kind of see what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it, and that we can grow together and get better and better at it.
It's wonderful. So let's assume that you talk with that partner and there's alignment. You're in lockstep, and then they go and try and select securities according to the mandate that you gave them. How concerning is the issue of greenwashing? And that has a little bit of a negative connotation, but more generally, disclosure quality by issuers of securities. People are out there trying to disclose, and I would assume in a truthful manner, what's going on, but those disclosures are all over the place. They're not perfectly comparable, and who knows whether those disclosures are reflecting what truly goes on within the corporation. So how concerned are you about disclosure quality?
I am, how to phrase this? I really want I want accurate disclosure. I would rather hear from a partner, we are concerned about the energy transition, and we've started our research. We're not done yet. We haven't totally wrapped our head around it, but we're doing this and that, and we're hoping to improve our processes in the future in line with your mandate to address that. I'd rather hear that than, oh yeah, don't worry, we've got a climate policy. Here's the carbon footprint report. See, we've taken care of it. That's not enough. I don't want reports and anecdotes. I want to know from the investment decision makers that they really fundamentally get it, and they're trying to address these things over time. So progress towards perfection is better than, trying to appease us by providing information that may not be all that meaningful. Can I just add to that one? Yeah. So the one additional piece is the work that I have been very fortunate to work with the CFA Institute around the ESG disclosure standards, and taking this idea of ESG, this term ESG or sustainable investing, responsible investing, and breaking it into the component pieces and really understanding exactly what people mean when they talk about ESG or sustainable or responsible. It's really about understanding those proxy voting, outcome-focused stewardship. Are there actual exclusions? Are there portfolio level objectives in terms of metrics or objectives? So really breaking it apart and saying, really tell us exactly the bits and pieces of the process and how those are being applied to our mandate.
Is it fair to say that a lot to be done, but we're walking a path that gets it to a more precise place in understanding and decomposing the E, the S, and the G, even if we don't use those words or those letters?
I think so. I think it's encouraging the level of discourse and the sophistication, how it is seemingly improving. So, and getting to the core of the issues that matter to investors. I think it's really encouraging, and we are on the right path. There's going to be some more bumps along the way, but
there's been a lot of pledges. Net zero. We will do net zero. We'll get there in X number of years. Are we on the right track? Do you see any big obstacles that we need to handle as an industry?
Yeah, in terms of our journey towards net zero, I think there are a lot of obstacles ahead of us. We have dramatic improvements to make in terms of emissions performance globally. We need emissions to peak. We need them to decline very, very, very rapidly. So people are talking net zero by 2050, but those targets were anchored in, several years ago, and with the belief that maybe we'd start to do something. But we haven't. Emissions are continuing to increase. The concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere is increasing. The concentration of methane in the atmosphere is increasing. These trends have not even peaked yet, and we have to go rapidly down towards 50-60% lower by 2030, and net zero. 2050 is not going to cut it, given the amount that we've emitted in the past few years alone. So there's a lot of challenges, and I think from a industry, the finance, like we're not the industry to solve this. We have to enable this transition to occur, and we need to be very, very encouraging of that transition to help make sure that it does.
And beyond our industry, do you have any views on what are the main things that government should do to step in?
Yeah, we need to use every lever that we have available to peak and then reduce emissions quickly. So carbon pricing. So in Canada, we have a price on carbon that's rapidly escalating towards 2030, towards $170 per ton. We need regulations around those high emitting sectors. So, the city that I live in has green building standards. Those are set to ratchet up quite a bit over the next 5 or 6 years towards that standard of net zero for buildings. So we need regulatory intervention. We need pricing on carbon. We need all of these things really to help internalize the potential costs of climate change, and so that we all address it in the decisions that we get to make.
Takes a village or a whole world, perhaps. Do you have a view on carbon offset markets? Is that a tool in the box, or is it something that distracts from progress?
So in terms of offsets and what role they play, I think we need removals is what we need. We need to be removing carbon from the atmosphere. That's in, even in these net zero, the net in net zero is about removing. It's not about emitting less. It's about actually removing emissions from the atmosphere. But while we develop those technologies, it's going to be a whole lot easier if we have less to remove in the future. So we have to drive emissions down as quickly as possible. And at the time when we have some residual emissions, when there are sectors where we just can't figure out a technological alternative, or the alternative is just in crazily expensive, we're going to have to think about taking that carbon out of the atmosphere and sequestering it permanently. So definitely a role for it. We've got a net zero commitment ourselves. We know it's got to be a part of the solution, but we're a pension fund. We're very unlikely to be in the business of buying credits and retiring them. We're going to look to invest in some solutions.
So we talked quite a bit about the E in ESG. If we can shift gears for a minute about the social and the governance dimensions of this, what are some of the factors that you think about when you engage on the S and the G?
Yeah. So I think, I kind of feel like this term that I've heard more recently, is the polycrisis, is we have lots of different crises happening at the same time. Climate, yes. There's food issues, there's water issues, there's inequality is a really core issue, which again has the ability to impact all these other issues as well. We need to be increasingly thinking about these systems and the interconnection of, if we want this thing to happen, these other things are going to have to happen as well. And some of those are social issues around inequality or racial equity, which we have not addressed as a society, and that we have a lot of work to do. And we won't be able to, quote, fix our problems unless we kind of address a lot of these issues simultaneously.
It's interesting and also tragic that the communities that are tend to be most disfavored because of environmental disruption could also be disfavored if we are not careful in how we mitigate and transition into a more sustainable future. So that should certainly be part of the conversation in my view. Now, we are closing with one question that I have for you is, do you have a call for action in this area?
I have lots of calls for action around what to do around sustainability and investing. The main call to action is get started. It's don't wait till you have a perfect plan. Don't wait till you have perfect data. We don't need at perfect anything. We just need to take the initial first step. So if you're an asset owner and you're not sure where to start, just start asking your external investment managers about some of these things. How are they thinking about environmental issues? How are they thinking about climate change? Just get the conversation started. If you're an asset owner, there's tons of networks out there of other like-minded asset owners that you can work with. Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance. There's Series, Investor Network, Climate. Like whether you join them or not, there's all kinds of resources available to people out there to just take the practices that are available, take the different pathways, there's a playbook for putting together, climate action plan. There's a playbook for due diligence. There's everything available. You don't have to reinvent it. You just have to take one of those things and get started.
Brian, thank you so much for sharing your story. We will continue this conversation in various forums, but the Sustainability Story podcast is certainly one of those. So thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for the substantive contributions to the industry. Thank you for your volunteering with the CFA. That's much appreciated. And that's it for today's episode.
All right. Thanks very much. Much appreciated.